We'll continue our lecture series on sites and site plans and topo surfaces in this video by looking at property lines and site components. There are three types of way to make property lines within Revit: from sketching, from a table where you describe the distances and the bearings, and from an AutoCAD file. To begin with, to understand the property lines and how they are and how they relate to your project, we jump back to the late 1800s, where the United States Geological Survey was first started. And what the government did at that point was map the entire United States and made a grid over the entire United States. And they did this very accurately. And they put pens, they call them pens, survey markers in the ground at the intersection of all these grids. And from these pens, a surveyor or a civil engineer can find exactly where they are on a map of the United States by using these pens. So then your property is related to these pens, and so you can actually locate exactly where your property is on where it is in relation to the entire United States. And then delving even closer to your property, you now have a starting point of your property coming from these survey markers. And then you have property lines, and the property lines mark exactly where your property is. And they do this through distances and bearings. So one edge of your property might be 100 feet long, 15 degrees east of north. And that line creates one boundary, and then you work your way around until you get a closed loop, and that is your property. Hopefully this will make a little bit more sense as we learn how to create our property lines in these three different manners. So let's take a look and let's get going. So the first way we will create a property line is simple enough. It's by sketching. So we'll go over to our project browser and we'll go to our site plan. And then if we go to our Massing and Site tab, to our Modify Site panel, we can see the property line tool. When we select the property line tool, Revit asks us, do we want to sketch it or enter it by, or create it by entering distances and bearings? So for now, we'll create by sketching. And we'll do a very simple one. We're just going to do a rectangle. And we'll finish that sketch mode, and you can see that we have a rectangle with this line type pattern, which is the property line type pattern. The nice thing about the property lines is they hold information about these distances and bearings that we were discussing, and they also show up, they're model lines, so they can show up in any plan view. They don't show up in the elevation or section views, but they do show up in the plan views. So what is special about these property lines? First of all, they have they have a bearing to them. So by default, Revit has north pointing straight up. If we look over into our property palette, we'll look at the orientation of this view. Right now, the orientation of this view, these are view specific of the site plan view, is project north. So project north means that it doesn't have any relation to true north. But we can change this, and we want to when we're looking at when we want to annotate or take a look at these property lines and which way they're facing. So let's go ahead and change this to true north. And when you change this to true north, Revit puts north straight up the page. And we can look at this. Let's add a tag, a property line tag to this line here. One's not loaded, so we can just go load that from the annotation folder from the Imperial Library, and we'll go to Civil and we'll load a property line tag. And we don't need a leader. Now that we've loaded it, we can see here that this line, so this tag is describing this line. This line is 88.5 feet long, and you can see that when you read this here, you read the degrees, and then you go from the direction at the end of the line in relation to the direction at the beginning of the line. So this is 0 degrees east of north. which basically means it's going straight up, straight north, which again, because of the true north setting in Revit, it's straight up the page. Now we'll learn a little bit later how to modify that difference between true north and project north, but let's continue on with our property lines. So we're going to delete that just for now, and we can highlight the property lines and edit the sketch, and now we can make it however big we need it to be. So that's the simple way of sketching property lines. So for example, if you have a plot plan and it's a hard copy, a lot of times I'll scan that plot plan in and trace the property line in Revit with my property line tool. And then I will get really close using that method by sketching the property lines. And then I can change this to a table, which we'll look at in just a minute to make it exactly accurate. When I am beginning a project, I decide early on if I'm going to create these property lines using which method, the sketching method or the entering the distances and variance by table. And I'll let you know how I decide that. If I have the building, if I have a plot plan that shows the building in relation to the property lines, often the building is built parallel to the property lines, or at least one of them. And if that's the case, I will draw the building in. If I know if it's an existing building, I'll draw the building, model the building, and then I will create the property lines around the building and making sure that it's all parallel. And then I'll actually rotate it. A lot of times when you do this, north is not directly up. So once I do that, then I'll rotate the true north after I've created this. So the important thing is that the property line is correct in relation to the house. So that's how I sketch. If I know, if I don't have a house, if I don't have a building yet, and I'm going to create a new one, then I'll go ahead and create the property lines by entering the information on the table, and then I'll create the model of the building around that. So let's take a look at that. So this is creating the property lines by sketching, and that once you have a sketch of the property lines, you can create a table out of this, or you can enter the information in the table without having the property lines. So let's edit this first, and then we'll take a look at creating a new table. So if we select the property lines that we sketch, we can edit the table here instead of editing the sketch. When we edit the table, Revit gives us a warning that says once you go to a table-based property line, you can't go back to sketching. So it just wants to make sure that you are okay with, from here on out, you're going to have to be entering information instead of just drawing it. So we'll say yes. And you can see here is the distances and the direction. The direction of each line is right here. So the very first line is 100 feet long. And again, it's 0 degrees west of south. So it's due south. It's going straight south because there's no degrees off of that, that zero bearing. So let's change this to 45 degrees and see what happens. We'll hit OK, and we'll get an error that says the property line isn't creating a closed loop. And that's fine. We're just looking at it for now. But you can see that now that line is going at a 45-degree angle off of that. So that's how you create the table. That's how you can edit the table. You input the distances here, the bearings here, and usually you get this information from a plot plan. It'll have this information on each property line, and you can just type it in and it will be very accurate, and that's how you can do it as a table. You don't have to edit the table, though I find it easier to sketch the property line and then edit the table there. But you can always go to your Massing and Site tab and create a property line through entering the distances and variance. So you're going to go straight to the table here, and this is where you would fill in the information that you get from the plot plan, so you understand that. And the last way we'll take a look at creating property lines is probably the easiest. If you get a survey from a surveyor or a civil engineer, that information in there, usually you get it from an AutoCAD file. You can use that directly in Revit to create the property lines, and that will be extremely accurate. So let's take a look at that. We start by inserting an AutoCAD drawing. So we'll go to our Insert tab up here and Import panel, and we'll import a CAD drawing. This is the civil engineer drawing that we will use. I had this created for a project a long time ago. And we've inserted it. We used all the default settings for that. And so we can use that exactly how it is. Now, this actually is a site with two, it's a plot plan with two sites, and it's a little difficult to see, but this yellow line here is the property line. It's broken in half with this magenta property line here. So we're just going to focus on this one on the right-hand side. These are trees here. And we'll create property lines, and I'll show you how by doing this, it's exactly accurate to the file that we received from the civil engineer. So as long as he did his job correctly, ours will follow suit. So we'll go back to our Massing and Site tab and our property line tool. And we will create this by sketching. But as opposed to drawing it, we're going to pick lines here. And we'll pick the property lines that the AutoCAD drawing has. And again, it's hard to see, but it's the yellow line. So we'll go ahead and select that yellow line. And we'll work our way around to make the loop of the property. And then there's this one here. And we'll go ahead and trim these like so. And we'll finish the sketch mode. And so now if I hide this AutoCAD drawing, you can see that that's what we're left with. While we don't see the AutoCAD drawing, I'm going to go ahead and tag those property lines. And then we can compare that information with the AutoCAD information. So I'll bring back the AutoCAD. And let's start on the side here. So the AutoCAD drawing is this one in cyan. It's kind of blue cyan. And you can see that this property line here is 134.92 feet long. And it goes 3 degrees, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds west of south. Well, that's exactly what our Revit drawing shows as well. 134.92 feet, 3 degrees, 14 minutes, 8 seconds south. And you can look at this on all four sides. And they all match up. And so that is a very easy way to create very accurate property lines from an AutoCAD drawing. The last thing we'll take a look at in this video is site components. Site components are just like regular families, except for that they attach themselves at the right elevation depending on the contour that you're going to place them at. So let's create a topo surface really quickly, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so we have a topo surface here. And again, we'll go to our Massing and Site tab. And this time we'll go to Model Site Panel. And the first, we'll take a look at site components. And usually they're trees. Trees are the main one. There's some other things, but trees are the main one. And you can see as you place it, wherever you place it on the model, the trees actually go to the correct elevation. And that's how site components work. That's really the only difference between a site component and a regular component or a regular family. The other one is that we'll take a look at today is the parking component. And when you select parking component, you can pick different types. And again, they also follow the contour. Of course, hopefully you don't have a parking space on a very steep hill like this. But it does follow the contours like that. Usually really quickly, you would create a building pad, probably flatten out an area. We took a look at the building pad in the last video, And maybe we'll raise that up. This is just for example. And of course, if this was in real life, if this was a real project, the building pad brings the topos or the site down or up, depending, to flatten out that area of the building pad. But of course, you would have to come in with a wall to retain this. So you would put in a wall along this line. You know, and that wall's not even tall enough. So you'd have to bring it there, and then you might want to actually edit that wall profile. Something like this. And this would be a concrete retaining wall that you would have to build to make this flat area. And then you'd also need one down on this side, of course, to retain the dirt underneath the building pad. But now you can come in and put your parking spots right here. And those are parking components. And you can schedule these, so if you have a whole bunch of parking components, you can array these over a big site, and then Revit will do the counting for you.